Hello everyone, my name is Corey and I'm about to consume some sugar-free Haribo gummy bears. Now if you've never heard of these little buggers are notorious for having a laxative type effect on the bowels. Now since I want to enjoy the rest of my day, I'm only going to start with a serving size, which is all it recommends if it's your first time eating these. But on Amazon you have the option to buy an entire 5-pound bag, if you will. There's a man on YouTube who goes by the name LA Beast who consumed the entire 5-pound bag in one sitting, and at the beginning of that video he shares various Amazon reviews from other customers and their harrowing experiences they've had with these gummy bears. For example, the user I Like Cheese stated, "Ate a bag of these when I boarded a 6-hour flight to Seattle. Gastric exorcism at 30,000 feet. Enough said." Another review that he shared said, "But seriously, if you intake more than 15 of these gummy bears, prepare yourself for intestinal cleansing of the ages." So I figured it'd be a little entertaining to consume some myself while also reading off some other reviews at the same time, because the Amazon reviews are chock full of these god-awful experiences that people have had. But before we dive into that, I want to take a first-hand look at LA Beast's experience when he consumed the entire 5-pound bag.
Oh jeez, I can't make it.
The music is a nice touch.
I can't make it.
Oh, he's got no toilet paper. That sounded like it could have propelled a jet. Alright, well, hopefully I don't experience anything even close to that. First review from Mickey, entitled, "Perhaps best not to eat too many at one time. However, these are yummy, soft, and extremely delicious. You get a lot for the money and it's well worth it. Perhaps best not to eat too many at one time. However, it's all up to the individual that decides when enough is enough. Also, during my taste test, I'm not sure what my bowels shot out of me, but somehow I can do arithmetic again. Thanks, Haribo." Alright, I'm officially enticed. This is the most dense candy I've ever put in my mouth. You could shoot one of these with a gun and I do not think it would penetrate. That literally had zero effect on this thing. It did not get flattened at all. I'm convinced you need saw blades for teeth to eat these things. I wouldn't be surprised if this turned into a rock in my colon. Surprise, lighting changed. Alright, I'm gonna try my best to carry on. Next review. This man claims they give you superpowers, and he actually has an image attached of a porta-john that looks like it's been shot by a cannon. Every second that goes by, I become more fearful. Next review. Anne Marie Rinaldi says, "I ate a nickel when I was 2, but I found it shortly after eating this bag." Jonathan S. left 2 ratings. He left 1 5-star rating, as well as a 10 out of 10. And he says, "Honestly, it's not as bad as some of the reviews made it out to be. I only had to stay in the hospital for a week after eating the entire bag in 4 hours." That does not make me feel any better. After some deep diving, I actually managed to find LA Beast review. He says, "I ate the entire 5-pound bag and I am writing this review from the toilet. Feels like Mount St. Helens just exploded from my butthole. Why, oh why?" The LA Beast. "I uttered these fateful words 5 hours ago when the water fountain of diarrhea started to exit my rear end like an exorcism in full progress. I'm severely dehydrated and I have set a new world record for most poops in a 5-hour period, with 9. I am laying on the bathroom floor in a fetal position, just like another gentleman who experienced the same thing, in which he wrote in his review. And I plan on spending the night right where I am. May God have mercy on my insides." The LA Beast. According to Amazon, customers who bought this item also bought a 90-pack of Charmin Extra Soft toilet tissue. Understandable. I just found my first 1-star review and this person is frantically trying to figure out what came in their bag. And there's an image attached. Christ only knows what that is. My bag is finished. The internet person left a 5-star review and he calls them weight loss bears. I've had a long battle with constipation due to my extremely poor diet of burgers and pizza. I bought this bag of gummy bears hoping that it would help me lose a little weight. Little did I know I would piss out my ass. I dropped from 260 to 215 pounds in just a few months using these little beauties. I don't have a sense of smell, but the birds flying by the windows would literally fall down and seize. If you want to turn from morbidly obese to just moderately fat, buy these beauties. They will instantly drop the meal you just ate into the toilet bowl and will turn the kid cleaning the bathroom you chose to drop your deathly deposit in at suicidal. Lady Di left a 4-star review. Recently I experienced a terrible loss in my life. Eating can be a consequence of such a sad event, as it seemingly makes you feel better emotionally. However, I also felt fine physically. I did not experience diarrhea like Jeffrey's airport experienced in 2013. I enjoyed the 5-pound bag all by myself, although it took me about 5 months to eat it. I have IBD, so if anyone's stomach and bowels would give way like the Hoover Dam busting apart, it would probably be me. I experienced no such misfortune, and I am starting my second 5-pound bag. I usually never write reviews. I did want to pass along my thoughts on Jeffrey's harrowing airport experience. If he's not a writer, he should become one. I never laughed so hard in almost a year, albeit at his unfortunate turn of events with illness and subsequent missed flight. Kudos, Jeffrey, and always keep a stiff upper lip and ass. So after some not so extensive research, I found Jeffrey's airport experience that Lady Di was talking about in the last review. Jeffrey left 1 star with the title, "Hell holds no surprises for me anymore." And let me tell you, this man wrote a novel. And I know it might take me a while, but I'm gonna read the whole thing. This will probably be the last review I read, because it's probably gonna take me till the break of dawn. But if you want to hear a live reading of Jeffrey's airport experience, then stick around for a while. So let's dive in. This is a cautionary tale, and unlike most other reviews on this product, this is a true story and its authenticity can be qualified by a small news item that appeared in the Toronto Star local news section during the month of April in 2013, much to my chagrin. I would consider myself a prudent man, not given to the bouts of outspokenness or craving attention, and certainly not one to rock the boat. On any given day, I can be found reading a crime novel on the park bench in the middle of the city, soaking up the opulence of nature while nibbling on my tuna fish sandwiches and fending off the ferocious gulls and squirrels that threaten to spoil my repose. This is me, law-abiding and introspective, which is why it came as a shock to me to find myself incarcerated because of the devil's confectionery, Satan's sweetmeat, Lucifer's lasagnas, the horror that is known as Haribo sugar-free gummy bears. I'll set the scene. It's late winter, early spring in Toronto, and the city has just been digging itself out from a late season snowstorm. I was heading to Pearson International Airport for a red-eye flight to Amsterdam in order to give the Dutch arm of our company some training on the new software that had been installed. I'm deliberately being vague to prevent my place of work from being linked in any way to the incident that occurred. I had just finished packing, checked the time, and found I was running late. My flight was at 7:10 p.m., and it was almost 5 p.m. Cursing softly, I ran out to the car and threw my bags in the trunk, hitting the gas a little harder than usual in my haste to make it to the long-term parking lot as soon as possible. Luckily, traffic was light on the 401, and I made it to the airport in record time, but knew that my chances of making my flight were still at risk if I didn't use my time wisely. I hadn't eaten lunch, and I was feeling a bit hungry, my stomach rumbling loudly in protestation, which caused me to look around at other travelers rushing past me in the busy terminal, mortified that my bodily noises might be heard by others. I briskly checked my watch and decided that I had enough time to grab a quick snack before going through baggage check and security, and would get something more substantial once I was checked through security. I spotted a vending machine nestled in a relatively low traffic corner of the terminal and rushed over, already pulling out my credit card and mentally assessing what I had a craving for so as to save time interacting with the machine. My eyes scanned the colorful array of confection quickly, coming to rest on a tantalizing, rainbow-colored bag of gummy bears with a simple white and red logo, Haribo, emblazoned across the bag in what appeared to be a slightly tweaked Helvetica rounded font. Now, I'd like to pause here in the story for a moment to underscore the importance of making proper choices. I was hungry. When you're hungry, you should eat food. Food is defined as a nutritious substance that people consume to maintain life. This is what food is. These days, the definition of the word food has been bastardized and the meaning has been broadened to include veritability, any material that can be digested or rather chewed and swallowed without causing death or severe illness. Haribo sugar-free gummy bears are not food. They aren't even from this planet. I imagine their origins being conceived in a boardroom in hell by a top team of creative pain administrators, with senior-level demons rubbing their hands together in a ghoulish delight as hell's chief chemist slowly lifts the veil on their new creation. The point here being, I made a very, very, very poor choice. I pushed the button on the vending machine, ejected the brightly colored bag into the awaited hands. I had always liked gummy bears. They were bright but rather innocuous. They weren't overly sweet so as to become cloying, and of course each candy came in the visage of rather happy, docile bear reminiscent of the picture one's mind eye holds of all anthropomorphic bears from Yogi to Winnie. That was a mouthful. This wouldn't be so difficult if I wasn't at a 7th grade reading level. The way I figured it, I was taking a bit of a holiday from life, so I could relax my fast-dousely regimented daily schedule a little to allow for some frivolity. After all, I was going to be in Amsterdam come morning with 16 hours to kill before I had to be training the Dutch employees. Maybe I would take a trip down to one of the coffee shops in the red light district and really let my hair down. No, I wouldn't do that. I would see that area of the city from the bus as I went to the hotel, where I would eat at the hotel restaurant and drink sparkling water. So I'd better enjoy the gummy bears, my extravagance to commemorate my break from routine. I joined the queue in the KLM line, which was mercifully short, most likely because all the passengers for my flight had already been checked through as the flight was scheduled to depart in an hour. I checked my watch again, frowned, and absent-mindedly opened the bag of Haribo sugar-free gummy bears and began to munch on them as the line slowly advanced. To be fair, they tasted fine. Just like every other manufacturer's brand of colorful candy, they were sugar-free to the boot. This is what made the whole incident that followed so baffling. If they had tasted off or different, I most likely wouldn't have continued to shovel them into my mouth absent-mindedly while daydreaming about what I would order to eat from the room service at the hotel in Amsterdam. As I gave the attendant my e-ticket and she weighed my bags, the first of the pains began in my stomach. I thought nothing of it at first, chalking it to the fact that I needed something more substantial than gummy bears to tackle my hunger. But over the course of the next 5 minutes, the shooting pain began to come more rapid succession. At this point, I had my boarding pass printed and rubbing my stomach a little, I proceeded to security. I briefly entertained the thought of trying to find a restroom before going through security. But at that point, my discomfort was manageable, and I didn't think it was going to get any worse. Certainly not within the amount of time it would take to clear security. I joined the line and started fishing for my passport to present to the agent checking tickets. I felt a thin sheen of sweat break out on my forehead and underarms, and my features flushed for a moment as a wave of heat washed over me. I didn't pay much heed, as going through security always caused me great anxiety, and I chalked it up to pre-flight jitters. It felt like time had rippled for a moment, as if my consciousness buckled, so intense was the pain that fired through my bowels. I grimaced spastically and emitted a low groan, and felt myself take an involuntary step away. Stars shot through my head briefly, and my vision blurred, and then snapped back into focus. The agent was staring at me with slight concern, and asked me if I was alright. I pulled myself together, stood up straight, and declared that I was fine, mortified that I had a lapse of decorum, not only in public but at the security clearance in the airport. As I fumbled off my belt to go through the metal detector, the pain in my stomach increased and I practically had to sit on the floor to take off my shoes, terrified of what would happen if I bent at the middle to do it. It was becoming increasingly more evident to me that this wasn't just a stomachache. No, this was something much worse. As a child, I had a bout of diarrhea after a trip to Mexico with my family. I remember the feeling of nausea that swept through me before my child self had surrendered to the gas pains and parked myself in the toilet for an hour, shitting until it felt like I didn't have any bones left. And that was how the feeling was now, with several key differences. The pain was worse. The sense of an impending bowel movement was so formidable, it gave me temporary amnesia. and it took all of my willing power, all of it, to clench my butt cheeks together to prevent my sphincter from exploding. A sudden shock of pain racked my body, and I half wondered if I was about to give birth to the Tasmanian devil. The crazy, fever-induced image of said cartoon animal chasing Bugs Bunny through a splashy, volcanic shit kettle that was my stomach caused me to elicit a short, maniacal bark of laughter as I approached the metal detector. A wild, distant look in my eyes, sweat now beginning to pour off my face like a long-distant runner in Kenya. The security agent on the other side of the detector shot a quick glance over to her coworker, who narrowed her eyes and made a subtle movement towards his holster. My breathing became uneven as I entered the metal detector and realized with alarm that I had taken off my socks without even registering, and one of my shirt tails was untucked in the front. I held my breath, my eyes bulging dangerously from my head as the machine scanned me. As I shakingly moved towards the agent for a pat-down, my stomach began to elicit sounds that can only be described as otherworldly. It started off a sort of bubbling sound heard from afar and grew in pitch and intensity with an alarming rate. My jaw dropped in shock as what I can only describe as the sound of an agonized, wailing alley cat in heat with a persistent Doppler effect added to its voice emitted from some nether region of my intestines. As she reached my shins, I felt my innards suddenly expand and plummet towards my rectum. With cat-like reflexes, I squeezed my sphincter shut with what seemed like nanoseconds to spare, and I knew that if I didn't get to the bathroom immediately, I would shit myself. With a Herculean effort and all the strength that I could muster, I forced my butt cheeks together, knowing that one false move would open the floodgates. I began to walk like a duck, trying to remain as inconspicuous as possible, not even caring now what other people were seeing in front of them. A disheveled, barefoot 40-year-old businessman, red-faced and bulgy-eyed, sweating profusely, shaking slightly, and walking without bending his knees. With single-minded intensity, I grabbed my carry-on, shoes and socks from out of the plastic tub that had passed the x-ray inspection, and without putting anything back on, I turned my heels with the anticipation of finding the nearest restroom and slowly dying there, one squirt at a time. But that's not what happened. I turned to go and found myself staring at 3 armed agents who stopped me and asked if I would follow them. "Why, what's the matter?" I stammered, wincing slightly as the act of speech seemed to strain the tenuous and extremely fragile truce I had negotiated between my bowels and the tempest that raged within. "I have to go to the bathroom right now," I pleaded. "Just follow us, please," they said, leaving no room for argument. The other travelers clearing the security check stared with curiosity and revulsion at the spectacle unfolding before them, whispering amongst themselves and hurrying to pack up their belongings to get as far away from me as possible, no doubt assuming that the airport had nabbed some sort of domestic terrorist. If I hadn't been feverishly trying to hold back the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, I would likely have died of shame. With each step I took towards the room they ushered me into, I felt that my legs would give way. Marveled at what was essentially patching a hole in the Hoover Dam with bubblegum could actually be sustained indefinitely. Maybe I would make it through this ordeal after all. The room they brought me into was an examination room. I had pretty much stopped registering details of my environment as my consciousness closed off all of the absolutely necessary functions, breathing and my ability to walk. But I snapped back to reality when I heard the snap of rubber. The slow dawning of realization poked through my agony and stoic resolve as I turned to face an agent donning rubber gloves. "Sir, we are going to perform a cavity search on you," a young, fresh-faced agent stated in a firm but emotionless voice. His short, cropped blonde hair was immaculate, and for a crazy moment I wondered if he was an actor and this was all some sort of elaborate practical joke done to amuse bored kids watching YouTube. He must have taken my tortured silence for resistance because he looked at me sharply and said, "Lower your pants and underwear, please, and face the desk." Panic started to grip me in its icy grasp, and the sudden adrenaline threatened to destroy my sphincter bulwarks and rend my anus in two. "Sir, please," I begged, deferring to this kid in an act of desperation. "I have to go to the bathroom. You can follow me into the stall if you need to, but I had some Haribo sugar-free gummy bears, and now I feel like, but they had stopped listening and smirked at each other. Two of the other agents, a tall, dark-haired female and a shorter, balding fat man, looked away from me, and I could see them shaking a little as they stifled their laughs. "Sir, face the wall, put your hands on the desk, and spread your cheeks," the youngest agent stated. "But," I began to protest, and then a fresh shock of pain forced me to stop and lean on the table for support as the ungodly howling rose from my stomach, something between the dying moans of a woolly mammoth and the sound of bubble wrap popping underwater. Shaking uncontrollably and sweat literally raining down onto the tabletop from me, I turned to face the wall and heard a meek, childlike voice pleading from somewhere in the room. "Please," it said, and then again, "Please." From somewhere within me, my mind recognized that this sound had issued from me, although my consciousness now had begun to separate from my body, and I held my breath and prayed to God for strength. "He probably has some heroin or something up there that opened up," the female guard said, as a part of me that hadn't escaped to the other yet acknowledged that she was behind me to my left. "Probably high as a kite. Look at him," she said. The shorter guard agreed with a snort, off to my right. "Spread your cheeks," the young agent said, his voice directly behind me, lower than the other two. "And bend over," he said. "Please God, please God, please God, please God," I whispered in a desperate, maniacal mantra, not even aware of my surroundings anymore. I felt like I was lost in an opium fog with half-snatched images and sounds filtering through to create a nonsensical version of reality. Another volley of pain tore through me, and I involuntarily leaned forward over the desk. My focus completely narrowed now to a spot on the wall 2 feet in front of me, a curious imperfection in what seemed to be a whitewashed stone wall. It was a dark blotch about 5 millimeters long and shaped like a smiling bear. A yellow dancing bear. No. A green bear. No, red. It was all the colors of the rainbow. My God, it was beautiful. It just took something as simple as a slight breeze to trigger Armageddon. That's all. No trumpets, no fanfare, no fire raining from the heavens, no dogs and cats living together in harmony, no finger on the button, no prophet to predict it, no nothing. As I stared at the rainbow bear smiling and dancing in front of me, my mouth agape, drooling, eyes glazed and bloodshot, face coated with the sheen of sweat, I heard the softest sound, an exhalation from the young agent behind me. And then at the same instant, the warm air of his breath feathered across my butt cheeks. For just a moment, maybe less, maybe a split second, even a nanosecond, I felt the presence of God there with me in that room as neurons began to misfire at a blinding rate. Nerve ending bristled and muscle twitched reflexively. I stood on the brink with one foot hovering over the edge, and then, without taking a step, I found myself plummeting. With what sounded like an extra large plastic ketchup bottle being run over by a Mack truck, my sphincter released. The pressure of the blast pushed me hard into the desk, and the legs of the desk screeched as they scraped across the floor. My body remained rigid for a moment, and I experienced a relief that can only be described as orgasmic in its purity. My eyes rolled back into my head, and my tongue lolled out of my head like a half-disabled dog, and I emitted a low, sustained groan that grew in pitch as the filthy torrent pushed its way out of my body. Tremors racked my body, and I must have looked like a fish out of water with an endless stream of shit firing out of my ass. Other sounds and sensations started to filter in now as my consciousness began to materialize once more. The muffled screams of a dungeon filled with prisoners near death radiated from my stomach. The rushing sounds of liters of liquid trying to escape through the aperture, too small to accommodate it all at the same time. The omnipresent sound of chunky liquid splattering against the hard surface with great force. The high-pitched scream of a woman's voice calling out to God. Another voice sobbing uncontrollably, imploring to make it stop. And of course my own ecstatic monotone wail. When my ordeal had eventually run its course, I was left panting for breath and wobbly-legged, half crying, half laughing with relief, barely lucid and feeling as if I had birthed an elephant. My colon felt like someone had poured chili sauce all over it and then sent a colony of fire ants to eat it. Through my sobs, I heard the sound of dripping, like when the sprinklers are eventually turned off after an office fire. or after a thunderstorm when the willow that overhangs a pond continues to rain down long after the sky has stopped. From behind me, the sobbing continued, and I heard someone trying to speak into a walkie-talkie, but nonsensical words were all that man could speak, which sounded like ravings of a lunatic. With great relief, I slowly pulled myself off the table. Legs trembling, my stomach elicited one last sound, a loud, prolonged gas bubbling that eerily resembled a pig orgasm. I slowly turned my head to survey the devastation, and in that instant, if I had a pencil or some other sharp object, I probably would have gouged my eyes out with revulsion. And the smell. The smell was enough to drive a man insane. It was the stench of rotting potatoes mixed with sulfur and ammonia, cooked in a broth of chicken feces and left to age for 2 weeks in a yeasty stew at the bottom of a French outhouse. After half a whiff of this ghoulish brine, I immediately stopped breathing through my nose, but the taste was to remain in the back of my throat for months to come. The young agent had taken the brunt of the foul witch's brew, and at first I couldn't process what I was seeing. I thought somehow the young blonde could have been spirited away and replaced by a brown golem, or an ATV rider that had spent the better part of the day driving through every puddle he could find after a torrential downpour. With some degree of compartmentalization, I came to understand that for some unfathomable reason this kid hadn't moved, or hadn't been able to move, through the entire fecal deluge. He had weathered the entire assault head-on like some sort of hero from Greek mythology. I had given this poor schmuck a one-man shippukaki that would make a Brazilian pornographer retch with disgust, and he is still in the same position he must have been from the moment of first impact. I tried to comprehend how he must have been feeling, what he must have been going through psychologically, but it became evident very quickly that he had become broken, very broken. No doubt forced so deeply within himself once the fire hose has been turned on that there was little to no hope of him ever coming back from it. Certainly not without extensive psychotherapy or lobotomy. I looked beyond his quivering, catatonic, crouched form to see a perfect outline of him on the white wall behind him, either side filled with a dripping, opaque layer of alternately pulpy and runny fecal stew. I noticed 2 quivering masses at either extremes of the room and realized they were humanoid form, although the caterwauling that was coming from these broken creatures was just blubbering gibberish. And that was the taboo that was burnt into my mind's eye for eternity. Needless to say, I missed my flight. In fact, the next week is a blur. I have vague recollections of an army of hazmat-clad figures looming through the brown landscape of the soiled room. The slopping sound of the rubber boats squelching in the puddles of fetid Doritos, uncontrollable wailing and animal-like sounds hissing from the mouths of the creatures that had been traumatized beyond their capacity for being put back together, the complete loss of sensation from my waist down as I rolled through the room on a waterproof gurney, its wheels struggling to surf on top of the shit-soaked floor. I spent a week or so in the hospital enclosed in a well-ventilated, sealed room with suited doctors coming in on the hour to monitor my vital signs as they tried to rehydrate my body. I had expelled every available drop of water from my body that was possible to sustain life within a very short period of time. All of my clothes were incinerated in the hospital's crematorium, and the soiled bag of Haribo sugar-free gummy bears was never recovered. This is my story. It is inconceivable to think that this kind of product could be sold legally and be misrepresented as food. I was lucky I survived. But as for the families of the survivors and the survivors themselves, they will forever live with the trauma of the events that took place at the Pearson International Airport on the snowy day in April 2013. The end. See, now I actually lied. I said that was going to be the last review I read, but there is one more by Scott T, and he says, I sent these to my ex by mistake. By mistake. Does that make me a bad person? Well, Scott T, if Jeffrey's story holds any truth to it, to the slightest degree, you are in fact a degenerate. And now, if you excuse me, I have just deuced trow.
Hey, so glad you made it. Did you bring a friend?